I am Rachel, and I'm going to be taking a probably wider industry view on the predictions than at least what I saw that got predicted last year. So it will be less of a technology focus and more of like an industry landscape focus. And the reason is because I work as an industry analyst. So an industry analyst, we focus particularly on practitioner-led technology adoption trends and kind of looking at the state of the industry overall. And the way that my firm in particular views the world is through the developer influence of technology trends. And prior to working at Red Monk, my background was on data, and particularly I was a DBA in analytics, which is probably going to help you understand why this is the trend that I have chosen to predict. So I want to talk to you about egress pricing. So this will surprise absolutely no one on this call. I'm sure this is a trend that is 15 years in the making, but cloud is a great driver of the way that all of us are building applications these days. And 15 years ago, when we were thinking about like the great appeal of the cloud, it said it was a different operating and financial model for our infrastructure investments. And we moved from being like this huge upfront capital expense in a data center to this pay-as-you-go pricing model. And I think over the intervening like decade and a half, the cloud providers are probably all going to say that the value of cloud is different now. And it's not just about the cost savings that you would get by moving away from a data center, but instead it's now about like this new and accelerated and secure way to operate. And I don't disagree with any of that. I think that's all true. But I also think that any user of cloud at any kind of major scale is going to tell you that all of those fractional pennies per second or per minute add up really quickly, and they can be really difficult to predict and really difficult to control. And I think data transfer pricing in particular is an area that is opaque to a lot of users of cloud. And it's intentionally convoluted, I think, for a lot of providers, and that is a way that they pad their margin on some of their cloud pricing. And it creates this concept of data gravity, where once you have the data and the workloads in the cloud, it's harder to move them out because it's expensive to move them out. And I love this diagram. It's from Corey Quinn's team at the Duckbill Group, and they do like cloud economics. And this is a view of just how complicated it can be to understand and predict the costs that are moving in the cloud, because there's different costs if you're moving it in between regions, if you're moving it in between services, whether that's a first-party service or a third-party service, and and then out of cloud is almost every case going to be expensive. And so all of these things can make it really complicated to understand what's happening with your pricing for data transfer and egress pricing in particular. And this is particularly, this slide shows AWS, but this is true of Google Cloud and Azure as well. But there are a couple of things that are happening that I think are worth highlighting why this might start to change. One is that we're seeing a rise of competitive clouds. And so I think we kind of talk about cloud, and in the US, it tends to be focused on like the three major hyperscalers. So Microsoft's cloud, Google's cloud, and Amazon's cloud. But we have competitors coming up like Oracle, who were late to the cloud game. But one of the ways that they are trying to attract workloads is that they are aggressively pricing their egress costs. And so like if you think about 2020 Zoom and the way that their business just exploded, and one of the marquee contracts that Oracle landed during the pandemic was Zoom's business, and that's particularly based around their egress pricing. And like not all of us are going to be having any kind of data transfer that's happening at the scale of Zoom. It's definitely a unique use case. I think the Reuters business article, when they talked about this deal, we're talking about 217,000 terabytes of traffic a month. Like really high scale traffic. All of us aren't necessarily in that, but we do see that people are trying to make headway into Amazon's lead. In particular, Amazon is the target of a lot of these things, trying to make headway into the way that Amazon has this market share by attacking the way that they are egress pricing. And then the other trend, and this is the trend that I think is particularly interesting, is that we are seeing a convergence of business models overall. So if you think about the cloud market and the CDN market, those used to be pretty distinct workloads where the cloud could kind of service general purpose workloads, and the CDNs really focused on like low latency specialized use cases for delivery. And we're starting to see both of those converge in each other in interesting ways. So we're seeing the cloud market starting to push towards towards the edge. You see things like AWS Outpost, where they want to be in your data center. We see all of the cloud providers have their own CDNs. We're seeing things like local zones and wavelength zones from Amazon. So we see this push outwards from like the core region model within the clouds out to the edge. And at the same time, we're seeing the edge push back, where we're seeing the edge start to search for some of those general purpose workloads. And Cloudflare in particular has done this in an interesting way. They have gone really aggressively after AWS in some of their products that they have announced. And in particular, last September, they announced a coming product called R2, which is going to be an object store. And they have two main attack points against AWS. The first is that they are not intending to charge any egress fees at all for the data that they are serving from their object store. And it is going to be an S3 compatible API, meaning that you would be able to migrate things out of S3 once, pay the egress fee, store it in R2, and then serve it without any egress fees from there. This is still super early for Cloudflare's product. I think it's still waitlisted and early access, so it's definitely not something that is going to change anything overnight, but I think it's going to be an interesting development to watch all of these markets kind of compete for each other's business. And so I think we see competitors going after Amazon in particular, but it's going to hit the top three hyperscalers more generally. And I think that we're going to see a lot of competition around winning workloads, specifically over egress pricing. I think AWS has enough market dominance right now that they won't be forced to immediately respond to any of these attacks. But my prediction and my hypothesis is that in the next 3 years, we're going to start seeing some of this downward pricing momentum start to hit for AWS and Google Cloud and Azure. And that is my prediction. So nothing specifically for 2022, but I do think, I guess my prediction for 2022 is that we get to stay where we are. But I think in the next 3 years, my prediction is that we start to push downwards. And that's it. Thank you, everyone, letting me chat. Are we doing questions now or later? How do you want to, are there questions, I guess?
I think it might be nice to do questions just so everyone like has fresh in their mind what questions they have right after.
Anything I can clarify for anyone?
Yes. I want to be a cloud expert, but this egress cost, is that like in the megabits per second going out? Is that what that is?
That's a good shorthand to think of it. It's going to be more complicated than that, depending on the service sometimes. So there's going to be things like if it's like how quick you want the retrieval, like the latency sometimes is going to impact that. So there can be compounding factors on top of that. But yeah, basically you're thinking data transfer out of the cloud.
Thank you.
Sorry,
I definitely notice a lot of those in between parts of the bill, like some egress and, oh yeah, you wanted to connect your things, great, well, we charge for that part. So man, it's hard to make sense of it. So that really resonates.
It's super complicated, and it's like intentionally super complicated. But I think if you look right here, so it's like that this top on the right, it's like inbound traffic. Generally, they will not charge for because they want your workloads to come into their cloud. Inter-service transfers is going to vary, so usually they'll prioritize not having you pay for like moving data between their own services. So like if you're using an AWS proprietary database to like an AWS messaging queue or something like that, you might not see a data transfer fee. If you're moving to a third party, you could. And then data out almost always has a transfer fee.
Do you find that like deleting data has a transfer fee as well if you wanted to delete like a terabyte of data you don't use?
I think sometimes, I think that's going to depend a lot on the service.
I also see Byron has a question in the chat. He says, pretty basic question. What is object store relative to database?
So database is going to be a bigger, more complete way of looking at data. So you can do bigger queries. Object store is more for like serving a specific thing. So like if you think like a media file or something like that, you or like an image, things like that. Database is going to have there's so many databases. So you have like a SQL database where you can look up like specific data points based off of a query, or there's a whole bunch of NoSQL databases where you can get to different types of data. So databases are a lot richer. But like if you think of the canonical object store that the industry uses right now is S3, which is Amazon's kind of just, you can dump everything in there and then find out later.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sweet. Any other questions? Oh man. Well, Rachel, thank you. That was a really good prediction. I like predictions when things are getting cheaper in the future. It's like the opposite of.
Let's see. All right, thanks everyone.